Swift programmers are becoming more familiar with declarative programming through the use of SwiftUI. Now, functional programming is a form of declarative programming, and imperative programming is, in inverted commas, ordinary Swift. This all gets very loose very quickly, so I prefer to have definitions, which are in the accompanying article for this video, and also practical examples, which are in this video. So let's take a look. So here's an example of functional and imperative programming. And functional programming is often thought as more mathsy, you're applying transformations to data. So if we look at the imperative example, we have a loop that manipulates an array. Now the disadvantage of this, in this particular instance, is you have the array, and because the array is a constant, then you need to make a copy of the array, and what I've called it output here, in order to double each of the elements within the array. And it's fine, it's all right. But the functional version is more concise, and some might say easier to understand. You've created a constant here called functional output, and you take the array and you map the function of the multiplication of each element by 2 to each element in the array. Some people find this easier, perhaps those from a maths background. Others find it trickier. But essentially it's the same thing. For both of these, we're taking an array and multiplying each element of the array and creating an output array. Imperative program is logic-based. We think of it as describing how to do something instead of what to do. An example of this is UIKit. So here I have an example of a table with just 5 numbers written on it. And you might have something as follows to create that table within UIKit. And it's fine. I've put this in the GitHub repo so it can be read over. It's reasonably easy to understand. We're creating the cells, and it's just quite verbose because it's, when we say describing the logic, essentially most of the logic is here, kind of, let's guess here, these delegate functions, data source functions, where we're describing what goes into the cells. The alternative, of course, is SwiftUI, and I'll come on to that in a second. SwiftUI is declarative programming, which itself is a form of functional programming. So here we're applying changes to state. What does that mean? It means we've got more concise code to have roughly the same output here. So we're taking strings and basically applying something to this data, to the strings, and transforming that to output. So the key thing here is it's shorter, and some would say easier to understand. And when you think back to the first example with arrays, it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of, you're doing something to an array. So then you can start to get a grip of which style do you prefer. And it's not saying one is better than the other, they're simply different. Using declarative or imperative programming isn't a cut and dried situation. If you have some logic and you think of using a functional solution or an imperative solution, maybe you'd go functional if you were concerned about rest conditions, for example. Maybe you're concerned about testability, so you might consider functional programming to be easier to test. But it really depends on the people who are working on the project, what the project is, the experience, and There's also this idea that imperative and functional programming can be mixed. And equally, for interfaces, UIKit and SwiftUI can be mixed. So there you're mixing imperative and declarative programming. It's totally fine. It just depends on the situation you're in, the context, and the people working on it. So if you're making this decision for a larger project, which isn't a toy project, it involves more consideration than just going one way or the other, and might take some more study. So this is another video which really says it depends to a question of should we go for one or the other. Anyway, hope that videos have helped you, and guess I'll see you next time.